This week brought a bit of surprising change to the Capitol. Finally, after months of denial, my Republican colleagues are at long last embracing and accepting responsibility for the budget that they insisted upon to end last year's government shutdown. And we're happy to give them deserved credit for that budget. A budget that borrowed billions of dollars from our schools, a budget that put $650 million in state spending on the credit card, and then we're going to have to pay $1.2 billion to pay it off. A budget that raised property taxes all across the state of Minnesota, and a budget that they did all those things for one simple reason, to protect large corporate special interests and the richest Minnesotans from paying a penny more. That's what this is all about. That's what this week has been all about and what the forecast is all about. Even more surprising, though, is the uniform way that Republicans, in their newsletters that are going out, are describing this beg and borrow property tax raising budget. In taking credit for the surplus, Representative Lomer, for instance, credited her prudent fiscal management. Representative Benson said that this was proof that restrained spending is working. Representative Mazerel said that through conservative fiscal management, we generated a $1.2 billion surplus. George Orwell, I couldn't have imagined a better scenario. Fortunately, Minnesotans know better. The real story of this forecast, as all of you know, is that our economy is showing signs of strength, which is great, and it's what we need to continue to focus on. But because of the Republican budget that borrowed billions, we face over a $4 billion budget deficit next year. We're not any farther ahead today, as we look to 2013, than we were when we came in a year ago in January. Minnesotans know that it's not prudent fiscal management to act that way, and they will have the opportunity to give Republicans much-deserved credit for their budget come November. This is also a week when we had plenty of time on the floor for multiple gun bills, a legislative proposal that raises up administrative law judges as the final defense against tyranny, and the introduction of Representative Downey's bill that would radically reduce unemployment benefits for Minnesotans who have lost their jobs. But we did not have any time this week, although we did all those other bills, to pass a single bill that will help a single Minnesotan get back to work. I am pleased that 4 of our DFL jobs bills were heard in committee this week. There will be one more bill heard next week, next Tuesday, our Bridges to Work bill that we've discussed before. And we're hopeful that we can make up lost time in these last 2 weeks before the deadline hits and get these bills through the process and actually deliver on what Minnesotans want, which is us to focus on getting them back to work. We really have a lot of work to do, and with 2 weeks to go, the clock is ticking quickly.
Well, thank you, Representative Thissen, and good morning. I was listening to the remarks that the Republican leadership made prior to us coming up here, and I just want to set the record straight with regard to what Speaker Zeller said on the school shift. He talked about and took pride in them putting into law that we would pay back the school shift after we got to a certain point in our reserves. And in fact, that is not the truth. That was done in 2004. Senator Stumpf was the chief author of that bill. It was, if you want to check, Chapter Law 272, Article 3. It was agreed upon by both parties, and it was done that way so that we would have some discipline. And Senator Stumpf at the time was very concerned when we moved to a greater shift back then, if you recall when that happened, and that is why he put it into law. And so I don't know why Speaker Zeller said that that was good fiscal management on the part of the House and his party, but in fact that wasn't the case. And so with regard to the budget, you know, I would echo what Representative Thissen said, but I think it's important to really peel back the onion a little bit and understand where that surplus is coming from. So again, primarily it's coming from 2 things. One is we expected more people to take advantage of the early MA than they did. And in fact, that's actually a concern, and we ought to be asking questions about that, because we know that it's not that all those folks who didn't take advantage of it have health insurance, and that's why. It's because there are barriers to access, and there continues to be. When they don't take advantage of the early MA, in fact, they're not going to get the preventative care. They're going to be going to the emergency rooms, and in fact, ultimately, that will cost us more in the future. So while I appreciated that Governor Dayton did that as one of his first executive orders, I'm still not quite understanding why we're not seeing the take-up. Now, there could be a piece of that in good news. It could be that more people are working given our unemployment numbers, yet I'm still somewhat skeptical about why we're not meeting those numbers. In addition, we continue to have folks taking advantage of the low rate for capital gains on the federal side, and they're concerned that that may change, and so they're taking advantage of that now. That also is part of it. It really isn't something that we did last session to balance the budget that is causing this surplus today. And I liken it to, when you have a mortgage, I have a mortgage on both my house, and we bought a cabin 2 years ago. That weighs heavy on me. So I could say, oh, isn't that great that, we're doing well financially, and yet in the back of my mind, I know about paying off that mortgage. And I think that we'd all be better off if we looked at the debt we owe schools as a mortgage and something that is an obligation, and it should be taken into account as we look at our overall fiscal health of the state of Minnesota. And then, of course, you have to talk about the Vikings Stadium, because that was the big news this week. Governor Dayton, and again, I would really highlight the role that his leadership has played in this. He has pretty much said he's not going to accept not having some movement towards making a Viking Stadium happen, and we all know he wants that to happen this session. And so there was a big announcement. It's still fraught with challenges and complexities, as Senator Senjum said, but I think we're now at the point where the responsibility is on the shoulders of the legislative leaders. And so I think particularly I would ask Speaker Zellers where is the leadership on that? Because it's not enough to say, well, the members have to get the votes. It really is about leadership. And so if this is a priority for Minnesotans, then we should see leadership with regard to that, both, from Senator Senjum and Speaker Zellers. I'm a little less harsh about Senator Senjum because he's been part of that working group, and yet I haven't seen the role of House leadership, particularly Speaker Zellers.
Do you think it's fair for the Speaker to say, which he said repeatedly, that he's not going to take an opinion for or against until he sees the bill, at which point then he can say more? Do you think that that's not enough?
Well, I think it's dodging, because I think he actually knows what's going to be in the bill. I mean, pretty much what's going to be in the bill. We announced it like it was a big change, but actually nothing's different than what we've been saying for several weeks. And so I presume Speaker Zellers has an opinion, and I'm interested in what it is. But I'm hopeful that Speaker Zellers will be one of the co-authors. I don't know if that'll happen or not, but I think it's important for leadership to take responsibility for the matters that are before the legislature.
Well, Senator Bonoff, on that point, and also Mr. Leader on that same point, some folks around this building are saying there's a significant number of lawmakers who don't want to vote on that issue this year. From the DFL caucus's standpoint, in the Senate and the House, do you indeed have a significant number of members who would just as soon not vote on this because it's an election year?
Go ahead.
So I haven't asked my members whether they want to vote on this bill in particular. The thing I think is the most interesting about the dynamics here is we've been in session, with this legislative majority now for a session and a half. They've expressed absolutely no interest in working with us on a bipartisan basis, or particularly really working with the governor on a bipartisan basis on almost every single bill. They'll also define a bipartisan bill as a bill that gets 1 Democratic vote, maybe 3 Democratic votes. You can look in your own stories, and that's what they say. On this bill, they say something different. So I think they got to figure out what their standard is. But I would also echo what Representative Bonoff and to the earlier question. We'll see now, next week when the bill actually comes out, if the Speaker's position actually changes, because then he will have a bill to look at, and maybe then he will start to take some leadership on this issue.
Senator, are there some members in your caucus who don't want to vote on this?
Stadium issues are interesting. There's usually strong bipartisan support and strong bipartisan opposition, and this one is no different than stadium bills in the past. Senator Bach has maintained that we'll have the same amount of votes for this stadium, takes more or less than the Republicans put forward when we were in the majority and we had the Twin Stadium. I think there's a pocket of supporters, perhaps a little more than that in our caucus, but we certainly don't have a caucus position.
Forgive me, but I'm kind of cutting a subtlety here, and it's not so much where the final vote will fall, but whether in fact members want to vote, whether they support it or or are opposed to it because it's an election year. Is there, and the governor has even alluded to that, the last couple of days at press conferences.
You know,
is there some truth to that as far as the Democratic caucuses are concerned?
well, here's what I'd say about that. Being an elected official is a privilege and it's an honor, but it's also a burden. And sometimes you have to take votes that aren't easy. And so I'd like to not have to take a lot of votes in an election year. You know, I'd like to just have really easy, non-controversial things come before me. But that isn't reality. And so while you may have a lot of members that secretly wish this would happen next year, I don't think that's really, pertinent, because at the end of the day, there is going to be a bill before us, and I would be very surprised if there wasn't a vote. So whether or not people wish there was or there wasn't, I don't think is really the.
If I may pursue this one, then I'll shut up. Okay. I grant you some folks may or may not want to secretly, but then in caucus, they tell their leaders, we don't want to vote on this, and then it doesn't happen.
So good question, fair question. We haven't discussed this in caucus, and I would say I don't think that'll be, when we do, I don't think that will be the result of our caucus conversation.
Senator Bonoff, you said there'd be roughly the same number of Democrats in support of the Vikings bill as there were Republicans for the Twins. What number are we talking about, roughly?
You know, Senator Bach has said, I believe there were 12 votes for the Twin Stadium from the minority, so he's thrown that out. I don't think he really means a hard and fast 12. I think we'll see where members are.
Leader Thissen, do you support the proposal?
I have to. My biggest concern is the separation of the Target Center from the stadium proposal. Personally,
What does that mean?
What are
I
you
think
concerned
that it sounds like they're going to run two separate bills, and I think two separate bills. One for the kind of dealing with the non-stadium issues, and one dealing with the stadium issues. I would like to see those together.
Why?
Because it's in the interest of my city.
So,
to put them together.
But I guess they're saying, the city council's saying, or the Mayor Ryback is saying, we're not going to act on one unless we get both.
Yeah.
So,
I understand that. I know how things operate around here, and so my preference would be that they would run together.
but on the concept of funding the Vikings Stadium the way it's funded, do you support that?
I think it's something that I would be open to supporting. Yeah, but I got to see the details of it, of course, more. But at the end of the day, we need to get. We need to spell it out, and that Target Center piece is what really concerns me.
Go ahead, Adam.
Do you think, from your perspective as a member of the Minneapolis delegation, that you need to see something from the city council before it starts to move in the legislature, a majority vote, at least basically supporting the concept?
I would like to see more action from the Minneapolis City Council on it before we move forward, but it's not a drop-dead criteria.
What's the status of the bill? Is it being written today? Is it going to be out Monday? Can you give any details, Senator?
Today is actually the drafting day. So as we sit here, I believe they're huddled in a room somewhere drafting, and it's being worked on.
And out Monday, is that the...
I don't know. I don't have that answer. I just know today's drafting day. I think, it depends on, there's so many details with regard to, as Paul said, this Target Center bill, this bill, how there's issues with regard to does there need to be a vote on the Target Center part on behalf of the citizens. Those kinds of issues are very complicated, and I don't think they've been resolved.
Senator, you support the stadium financing, correct? You were at the news conference yesterday. So
Yes, I do. And as I say that, I'm also saying there are certain things that have to be worked out, and so again, the devil's in the details, but in concept, I'm supportive.
So, Senator Bonoff, do you think this is now following the alternative pathway to the governor's signature?
It's certainly on a similar path, but if you recall, it took us a while to get that one done, and so I don't know in terms of timing. I don't have a prediction. I think it depends on how much work is able to be done in these interim conversations.
And that's really radically changed how well our education system is doing, hasn't it? So,
if the Target Center portion is not included in this bill or not acted on, do you still support the Vikings Stadium?
I'm sorry.
If the Target Center portion is not included in the bill, not acted on at all, do you still support the stadium?
I mean, speaking personally, that would be very difficult.
Well, and actually, I don't think that the proponents of the stadium from Minneapolis would still support it, and so I don't think it would be very difficult to have it move forward if we don't come to some agreement using this funding mechanism. There could be other funding mechanisms that wouldn't have to be part of the equation, but with the proposal that was put forward yesterday.
And just to clarify, not just Targets, I mean, there's some other cities, too, that could be part of that equation, too, helping with other facilities as well, like St. Paul. So.
And we should really step back and use this as an occasion for how should we be managing these properties. And we really shouldn't be managing them individually. We should take the time to create an authority that would be responsible for overseeing all of these venues so that we aren't pitting Minneapolis against St. Paul and legislator against legislator. You know, we should provide some leadership and direction. And I had suggested that perhaps this is a time to do that. I don't know if we'll have time to do that.
And let me also say, I mean, we have 2 weeks to deadline.
Right.
And so I really do hope, as we move toward deadline, that our focus remains on these jobs proposals and the things that actually are going to get people, you know, those specific things that we need to meet deadline on as we move forward here. I mean, this is going to, but it shouldn't, the stadium is going to, but it shouldn't swallow up everything else that happens here at the Capitol, because we have other important work to do.
And we are disappointed that the bonding bill, you know, I heard Senator Senjum say, oh, well, now we're going to begin talking about it, but it's pretty late, and there has been no discussion publicly about the bonding bill. And when does the public have a chance to come and make their case for what's important to them? And so I think by waiting so late into this process, we're really subverting the opportunity for the public to say what's important with regard to the bonding bill.
Do you envision a scenario in which the bonding bill and or the stadium bill come down to the sort of the very end, last night of session kind of thing? Is that what you're perhaps seeing?
No.
Mr. Leader, would a stadium produce more jobs than the jobs bills you were talking about?
I don't know the answer to that. I'm sorry.
Just to follow up on Jeff's question, there's another possible scenario there, too, that we don't have a bonding bill at all. Do you think that that's a possibility?
No.
Why not?
Because Minnesotans want us to have a bonding bill. There's people on both sides of the aisle that have projects that they want to get done. That's how bonding bills get done. I just wish that Larry Howes and the leadership in the House would start moving and putting that bill together so we can get it to a vote.
Yeah, the other thing about that is the forecast that we heard the other day actually does have within that an assumption that there's a $775 million bonding bill. And so you didn't hear Republican leadership say, oh, the forecast isn't right because we're not going to have a bonding bill. There was no talk of that. So I also would predict that we're going to have a bonding bill.
So just one last thing on the preview side for next week. There's a number of bills that came through this week and will be coming through next week through committee that are planning for the next state government shutdown. And I would prefer that we actually focus on getting people back to work and moving on jobs bills and maybe our foreclosure bills, things that will actually help middle-class Minnesotans, instead of passing legislation that is just planning for the next shutdown. And I can see why the Republicans, based on the budget they left us and what we're facing in 2013, may be wanting to deal with some of those issues, but I think we actually should get after the work that really matters to Minnesotans right now.
And in closing, the only other comment I would add is there really does seem to be a potentially viable alternative to the constitutional amendment for voter ID. And so the more we can keep that conversation in front of the public, the better. I think there's a tendency to say, oh, we don't have time to do that this year. But in fact, Secretary Ritchie and every committee that I've heard him in, when he puts forward the alternative, there really is bipartisan interest, and Senator Howe has said he's going to carry it. So I think that we would be doing a disservice to all of our state if we were to just accept that there isn't enough time to move forward on an alternative. Thanks.